Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast. I have a returning guest, author David Quammen. He wrote a book called The Tangled Tree, which was more recent than the book we're going to talk about, which is called Spillover, which is 1,000% relevant for the coronavirus pandemic that's going on today. Spillover talks about viruses leaving animals that we get in close proximity with, whether we're eating them or butchering them or maybe even hanging out with them and, infecting humans. So that's what his book talks about in part, and I wanted to have him on because I think he'll provide a lot of insight into what's going on. So, David, thanks for coming.
It's nice to be talking with you again, Rich. Nice to be back.
Yeah. What first prompted you to research the material for Spillover and then write it?
Well, I got interested in Ebola virus first about 25 years ago. I read some things about it, including some of Richard Preston's things. And then I did an expedition for National Geographic. I covered an expedition, a fellow who was walking across the Congo, walking across the great Central African forests. And I walked with him for about 8 weeks. We were walking in sandals and river shorts so we can cross swamps and things. And we walked for 10 days through Ebola habitat. And I knew that Ebola was there somewhere in some animal, the quote-unquote reservoir host, the place where it lives when it's not killing humans. But we didn't know what the reservoir host was. So it was this spooky mystery, walking through the jungle every day, sleeping on the ground every night, eating out of a common stew pot with 12 other guys, his Congolese crew, and wondering where Ebola was, somewhere near around us. And that got me interested in the ecology and evolutionary biology of Ebola virus. And then I noticed that was part of a larger subject, which was the ecology and evolutionary biology of what are called zoonotic diseases, these infections that pass from non-human animals into humans. So that was the beginning of the interest that led to the book.
Yeah, I know that's a big question with Ebola is where does it go when it disappears? No one knows. Yeah. And then I started thinking about flu, like where does it go in the off season? I call it, but I think what it does is it then moves to the climates that are opposite. In the south, I think it moves to the southern hemisphere and then maybe back to the north on this endless cycle. I don't know. Mm-hmm. And then coronavirus, we don't know yet, but we really don't know where it came from. We have speculation, and we don't know where it's going. So these are all good questions, I guess, for all these.
Yeah, this is a field, and that's one of the things that that made the book work for me as a project. This is a field that is all about detective work, a series of detective stories. A new virus appears in the human population, causing disease and death and passing from one human to another. Scientists isolate it, they grow it, they sequence the genome, they say, we've never seen this before, but it belongs to such and such family. But where the hell did it come from? Well, it had to come from somewhere, some living creature, because viruses can only replicate in living creatures. So we know if it's infecting humans, it probably came from a mammal similar to us. And then the mystery is which animal did it come from? Which mammal did it come from? That's mystery A. And mystery B is how did it happen to spill over from that wild animal into humans? And you have to solve those two mysteries in order to be able to prevent future such things from happening.
Well, so you studied spillover in I don't know how many viruses. Like what kind of insights have you gotten into looking at multiple spillover events for different viruses? Is it just so varied that there's no intelligence yet on it, or are there some? Well,
no, there are patterns, and patterns that can be discerned and predictions that can be made. And I tried to highlight those in my book for the readers, not just the reader's interest, but for the reader's best interests and health. We need to understand these things in order to protect ourselves and prevent more of these things from happening. But so 10 years ago, I'm researching the book. I asked the scientists that I was spending time with, these experts in infectious disease and zoonotic disease. I asked them, what are the chances that there will be a next big one, a next big global pandemic 10 years ago? And they said, yes, there's going to be a next big one. I called it that in capital letters, the NBO, the next big one. What does it look like? Well, they told me, this is sort of a consensus summary of what they told me. There will be a next big one. It will be caused by a virus. It will be caused by a virus we haven't seen before. Where will that virus come from? Well, it'll come from wild animals. What kind of wild animals? Well, possibly a bat. And I explain the reasons for that in the book. What kind of virus? Well, a virus that has the capacity to evolve quickly. So maybe an influenza or maybe a coronavirus. Where would this coronavirus pass from bats into humans? Well, someplace where we have contact with bats, for instance, a wet market or the supply chain on the way to a wet market. Where might that happen? Well, for instance, in China. So this is all in my book, published in 2012, not because I was prescient, but because these scientists were telling me these are the takeaway lessons. These are the prediction points that we should focus on. It's all there. The most surprising thing to me when this thing began and really got rolled was not that it was a coronavirus, not that it came out of a bat, not that it happened in or around a wet market in China, but that anybody at all could claim to be surprised by this. Could claim, well, nobody saw it coming. Yeah, we saw it coming. The scientists saw it coming. The science writers who follow the science saw it coming. And we were beating the drum as loud as we can.
Wow. I don't know. I mean, on this one, there's some reports that it may not have come from the wet market. Who knows? It may have been engineered. That's all.
Yeah, I've seen those. Yeah, I've seen those rumors too. Those rumors are provocative and titillating, but there's no data. There's no science behind any of those rumors. That's something, if it came from a laboratory, it'd be easy to prove because you'd take the molecular sequence, the genome sequence of the virus in people, and you would compare that to the sequence of the virus as anybody has it in the lab, and either it would match or it would be 3 years of evolutionary distance from that. And nobody has shown molecular evidence to support that claim. But there is a possibility that it did not come from the Wuhan market directly, that it got into people from a bat somewhere along in the supply chain, and that it was circulating in the city of Wuhan outside of the market as early as November. Now that's something for which there is some real evidence, and I'm going to be among the people who are trying to follow it up.
What would be the supply chain for a wet market? Just hunters that are...
Yeah, hunters, right, hunters, right. Where do these wild animals come from that are on sale in a wet market? Pangolins, sometimes pangolins from Africa can be on sale in a wet market in China. Turtles from Africa, tortoises from Madagascar, all these exotic endangered animals, in some cases endangered, that people want to pay premium prices to eat. There's a supply chain for that, and for a horseshoe bat that might be carrying a coronavirus, the supply chain wouldn't have to be that long. It would be from the countryside of Hubei province, or maybe the countryside of Yunnan province. There is evidence published 3 years ago that this virus had already been identified in horseshoe bats from a cave in Yunnan province by a very good scientist at the Wuhan Institute of Virology 3 years ago. She and her colleagues published a paper 3 years ago saying, look at this virus. It's the same virus. It's 96.2% identical, the genome, to this virus. She had it 3 years ago from a bat from a cave in Yunnan.
Wow. So, I don't know, do you feel like you have any particular insights on how this is going to play out? Do you think that all of a sudden the virus will run its course and disappear and we won't know where it goes? Or what are your thoughts looking forward?
No, I'm not optimistic that's going to happen. I'm like everybody, I'm listening to the experts now, and I'm reading some scientific articles as fast as I can. I'm paying attention to Tony Fauci. He's the only one that I trust standing up I suppose I trust Deborah Birx, but Tony Fauci has been around for a long time. You can trust him. He's got a very difficult job right now. I think that this virus is not going to go away. I think it's going to become probably an endemic problem in the human population. I think if we start to eliminate our social distancing, I think there's going to be a second wave that's probably going to be at least as bad as the first one. That might turn into a cycle, because I know it's hard. It's hard for people to social distance. It's hard. You know, I'm a freelance writer, so I can work from home and make some money. But, you know, if I were still a bartender, as I was early in my career, I'd be saying, like a lot of people, well, how in the hell am I going to pay my rent and buy groceries if I can't work? I sympathize with that deeply, but opening back up is going to cause another wave. It's going to cause a second wave of infections. More people are going to die. And then eventually we're going to, I hope, have a vaccine, maybe in a year and a half, maybe. And then it's going to take time to get people vaccinated. It's going to take time. So we're looking at years during which this is going to be, I think, a severe problem. And then after that, it's going to be a chronic problem. I think, and this is not original with me, but comes from people I trust, I think that maybe the model is not going to be an influenza where it comes and it makes people sick and it travels around the world, and then that influenza is gone and we have another one coming out of wild aquatic birds the next year. And when the influenza season is over in the northern hemisphere, then it's influenza season in the southern hemisphere, and then it evolves because influenza viruses evolve quickly and it's gone. No, I don't think that's the model for this. I think the model for this is measles. Measles can be a very serious disease. It can kill people in a naive population, can make a lot of people sick. It's very transmissible. We don't think of it much because a lot of the world is vaccinated. And so most populations, big populations like the US, we have largely herd immunity, but you still have outbreaks of measles. And in some cases, it still kills people. It never goes away. I think that that's the model for what this is going to. But that's just an educated guess.
Well, do you think that the world is overreacting by shutting down?
No.
You know, I mean, people die every day of all kinds of things. Do you think that this is warranted or no?
No. And notwithstanding Dr. Phil, 600,000 people do not die in swimming pool only. But people die of the influenza. Yeah, in a bad year in the U.S., 30,000 people can die of influenza in a bad year. So we're in April, and we've got, 44,000 deaths so far, and that may be an undercount. The case fatality rate, I think, of this in the U.S. right now is 5%. That's way, way higher than influenza. This is going to kill more people than influenza. It's going to kill more people than traffic accidents. It's going to kill more people than heart disease. This is a real crisis. And yet, yes, as I've said, I'm sympathetic with people for whom shutting down is a real hardship, and in some cases a life-threatening hardship. People have got other conditions that they need to have treated. So am I allowed to say it's a shit show on your show, Rich? Yeah. It's a horrible, heartbreaking mess. That's a little bit more polite way to put it, but it's not an illusion. It's not a small routine problem.
I don't know. So with your background and with your study, do you have any insight to help us? I don't know, move along the path towards being in a better situation somehow.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to do two things. First, we need to deal with this. We need to get this thing under control. And secondly, we need to be more prepared for the next one, because there will be another next one.
How do you get it under control if, if we don't have a vaccine or a medicine yet?
Well, you
locking down, that just seems to delay the inevitable, I guess. I don't know.
Well, they say flatten the curve. So delaying the inevitable involves allowing our healthcare capacity to deal with these cases that come along in a little bit more gradual way. And maybe the total number of cases, total number of people infected, maybe at this point, we can't control that very much. We can control it some, we can't control it totally. But if we slow it down by social distancing, by flattening the curve, by decreasing infectious contacts between one person or another, then that means that when you're I don't know how old you are, Rich.
Oh, I'm in my 40s, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So you got grandparents?
Well, no, I haven't
No,
had grandparents for a
no
long
living
time.
grandparents. So, but so, people can think about their 80 or 85-year-old grandmother. When she gets this, if the curve is flattened, there's more likely to be healthcare capacity to give her really good care, to get her into an intensive care unit, to get her a ventilator. But if the crisis is all happening at once, because 20-year-olds are running around at Fort Lauderdale infecting one another, and some of those young people get very sick. It's not impossible for a young person to get sick from this, but it's more likely that young person spreads the virus, and it gets to older people and people with secondary conditions, and then people are in mortal crisis because the virus is continuing to pass for lack of social distancing, and then that 20-year-old, then his grandmother dies because she's triaged in a corridor of a desperately overloaded hospital in Queens. Those are the stakes. And some people are saying, yeah, well, let this virus knock off the people who are most susceptible to it, most vulnerable to it, and then we'll have herd immunity. That's kind of hard. That's kind of cold.
I wouldn't want to be that person's grandparent, if they said
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, right. So again, I'm hugely sympathetic with the costs of social distancing, but the costs of not social distancing, I think, are even greater.
I mean, well, I don't know. So in Spillover, I mean, now is this prompted you? It's been, I guess, 8 years since you wrote it. Now it's, obviously
Yeah.
perfectly prescient. Are you working on a new book now? Are you going to be cataloging this crisis as it goes for a new work? Like, in your role as a writer, what's your job now?
Yeah, well, I've been doing a lot of interviews for the last 8 weeks, so that's taken most of my time, is talking about Spillover and talking about the predictions that it made when it was published 8 years, sort of following through with that because people want to know about that. But I'm also finally trying to do some new work, some new research, and some new thinking. I was working on another book for my book publisher, Simon & Schuster. They have asked me to shove that aside and do a book on COVID-19. Now,
Okay.
there's going to be a bunch of books done. Maybe every publisher in New York will have their own book on COVID-19, but Simon & Schuster has asked me if I would do theirs. And so how do you say no to that?
Yeah, no, that's great.
And I'm just finishing a piece on one aspect of this for the New Yorker mag. So I've been busy with it. So yeah, I'm starting to get back to being a writer.
Well, that's interesting. There's going to be a lot of books about it. What do you think will be useful that's written about it versus just, a Me Too book that's not very helpful? Like in general, what advice is helpful right now to people, you think, versus the news media is just constant panic?
Yeah. Well, I think there are two questions that sort of are bundled in what you just asked. What sort of reporting is helpful to people right now? But a book is not right now. If you're doing a book, you're talking about a year or 2 years from now at the very least. So what can be helpful in a book is different from what can be helpful on tonight's news or next week's issue of the New Yorker magazine. What can be helpful now, I think, is some of the things that we've been talking about. We need measures to get this under control, and to do that, we need social distancing, and we need cooperation for social distancing. But we also need scientific, technological, and policy support to help people who are distanced themselves, to help them be able to get out of those apartments and those houses as soon as possible. And that involves we need massive quantities of test kits. We need more. I don't know why test kits weren't quickly available. I don't know how we missed that one, how we swung at that ball.
They still don't seem to be available.
No, right. And some of them are reliable. Some of them are not.
Even worse.
Now they're talking about test kits for serum tests to try and reveal who has antibodies, who might have, passed through the tunnel and come out the other end with resistance to this thing.
Right.
That's an important thing to know because those people can go back to work. So we need to know that. We need to have that serum testing, that antibody testing. We need to have the diagnostic tests of who is simply infected right now. We don't have those in the quantity that we needed. I think I just heard that, didn't we just buy 600,000 test kits from South Korea because we don't have the capacity to produce them? That's crazy, but good for South Korea. South Korea has been on top of this from the beginning. for reasons that we could discuss maybe. That's part of what my New Yorker piece is about.
Well, I don't understand. I mean, we've had well over a month. Right? We can't galvanize the right companies in the U.S. and say, like, the government can't say, we'll pay you, produce the heck out of, what we need, make millions of tests now, we'll pay you, do it. I mean, instead, do a program to supposedly inject trillions, which does nothing, and most of the money never gets distributed anyway. Like, it just makes no sense. It's weird.
It does make no sense, and that's the sort of thing that South Korea did. Call in the South Korean version of Johnson & Johnson and tell them we want test kits. We want huge quantities of test kits by next week. Yeah, South Korea did things like that. Why didn't we do that? Well, it's because of who we is, I think, at the upper policy levels. We have not been well served by our leaders, our decision makers, our higher bureaucrats. It's been a tragedy of obfuscation, confusion, bad communication, cautious and misguided policy decisions, false economy, all those things.
Well, for instance, let's say you're Fauci. Okay, I know he's in an impossible position. I understand, but do you think he's said to Trump, for instance, "Hey, look, you gotta make an announcement that we're gonna, produce countless millions of tests like right away, and you're gonna essentially tell these industries get going." Like, I mean, do you think he's said that, but he's been told, don't say anything, or do you think he's even thought of that? Or, I mean, I don't know.
I think he's thought of that. I have high respect for Fauci. He's been around a long time, 6 presidents that he has served.
Wow.
He has had the opportunity to move upward in the bureaucracy, and he said, no, I'm going to stay right here at the National Institutes for Allergies and Infectious Disease. I think I can do good. I think I can make a difference. I don't know Fauci, but I've met Fauci. I've conversed with him briefly. He impressed me as a straight fellow. So I think he's not who I'm talking about. But he's, he tries his very best to be unpolitical, and yet it's to some degree a political job. It's the art of the possible. I think he is staying in it because he's thinking, I could say things and get myself fired in a blaze of glory tomorrow if I wanted to. But what good is that? So I think I won't do that. I think I'll stick it out as best I can and try and turn this aircraft carrier as much as I can with what leverage I have. I think he's doing that, and I'm glad he's doing that. But there's only so much you can do if you've chosen that route.
Yeah.
So what we're getting from his boss is this gobbledygook.
With your book, the Tangled Tree, it seems like you've come to a different understanding of evolution. So I want to ask you a different question.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you.
Where is this virus going, you think? Is it, like people say it's randomly mutating and natural selection, and, this is the same Darwinian story I've heard 8 billion times. Do you really think that's what's happening, or do you think the virus is kind of headed in a certain direction? Am I just saying crazy speculation? What's your thought?
Well, let's talk about that, because I'm very interested in that question, and I'm following some people, and I'm going to be spending more time digging deep into the work of the evolutionary virologists who are tracking this. First of all, let's talk about what we know. We know how they track it, and how they track it is by taking samples from different patients, different points in time over the last 2 months plus, in different places, taking samples of the virus and sequencing it, getting the genetic sequence of the viruses. And then they can compare that. They can build a family tree, just like I talked about family trees in the Tangled Tree. They can build a family tree of this virus since it was first sequenced on January 6th or January 10th in China. How has it changed? Mutation by mutation. It's a coronavirus, so it does mutate with a reasonable degree of frequency. That's something that's just true of coronaviruses because of the kind of genome they have. They have a single-stranded RNA genome, and when it copies itself, it makes mistakes. So this virus is mutating as it goes along, as it replicates itself. Some of those mutations just disappear. Why? Because it's a mutation that is a dead end for the particular viral progeny. So they just drop out. They're not successful in replicating in humans or getting transmitted. The successful ones are the ones that you see over time These sequences have followed through from Wuhan to Seattle to Chicago or whatever, and you're seeing a continuous lineage of this virus. The people who study this are telling us that this virus, it may be mutating at a relatively high degree, but it's not changing very much. Why is it not changing when we know that mutation is the raw material of evolution by natural selection, and that allows adaptation? Well, probably because it doesn't need to adapt any better than it already is. That's what they're saying, is that this virus is not changing very much because it doesn't need to change. It's already succeeding so well in getting from one human to another and turning itself into one of the most widespread viruses on Earth right now. So that's what I'm hearing.
So, okay, so you think it'll, maybe that's good in a way if it is static from here, because it may not be like flu, which seems to change dramatically every year and makes it difficult to find vaccines.
Right. Flu evolves much more quickly than this, changes much more quickly than a coronavirus. But a coronavirus changes more quickly than some other kinds of virus, like a herpes virus or an adenovirus. Those change much more slowly. This one is in between with a reasonably fast evolutionary potential. But if it's getting from one host to another and replicating itself abundantly in different cases and passing from one human to another, then it doesn't need to change to achieve evolutionary success. However, if we get a vaccine, then it's got a reason to evolve. So it has the capacity to evolve around a vaccine, to evolve to escape a vaccine, but not as fast as a flu virus does. That's the reason we need a new flu vaccine every year, is because the viruses evolve and there's always a new one coming at us. This virus, it may be around for a long time. We may get a vaccine. I hope we will. It may slowly evolve to escape that vaccine, to defeat that vaccine. But that's, according to what I'm hearing from the experts, that's not going to happen in a year. The vaccine that we get should be good for a longer period of time than that.
I guess it's a silly question if you think this is going to happen again. Unfortunately, probably will. But
yeah.
Do you think it will? And if it does, when and how? And what's your thought?
Well, if it's so, this is a spillover of a coronavirus from a bat into a human that turned into an outbreak in the city of Wuhan, focused on that market, dozens or hundreds of cases. And then it became an epidemic spreading across China. And then it became a pandemic spreading across the world. We can stop some of those transition points. There are going to be more spillovers of new viruses from animals getting into humans and causing outbreaks. Here's a dozen cases of people who died of a strange new pneumonia-like disease in some part of the world. Look, it came from this wild animal. We can contain it. We can get there fast. We can detect that. We can prevent the outbreak from turning into an epidemic, let alone a pandemic. We can do that. We have the science, we have the technology. If we have the political will to invest in more of that science and more of that technology, we can stop future outbreaks from turning into pandemics. And we need to recognize that. We need to have that political will to invest in the science, the technology, like test kits, diagnostic kits, more ventilator capacity, more ICU capacity, to invest in preparation. And if we do that, then we can probably, I hope, stop future outbreaks from turning into pandemics like this.
Yeah. Well, that's probably a good way to close. So, David, I encourage people to read Spillover. I've been going through it. It's a good book, and
Thank you.
Obviously it's super relevant. The Tangled Tree, probably secondarily to that, in terms of ease of understanding, it's just my guess. But both are good. So, how else can people keep track of you and what you're working on and find out more?
Well, I have a website, davidquammen.com, but frankly, I've been too busy to refresh anything on my website recently. I'm out here talking and writing. I'm easy to find, but more importantly, my work is easy to find, and I hope it'll be useful to people. What I try to do very hard, whether it's a piece for the New Yorker or a new book or whatever, what I try to do is explain the science and the human story behind these big important developments. I try to tell stories that are interesting, that are page turners, but that go deep into the science and give people a new way of seeing the world, and have some fun, even if it's diseases. The stories can be sort of fun to read, and so that's what I'm out here trying to do.
Well, very good, David. Thank you for coming. Like I said, it's been a great call, and I appreciate you being here.
Rich, always good to talk with you. Stay safe. Be well, man.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.